The chandeliers of the Palais Garnier ballroom cast fractured light across 500 faces turned toward the grand staircase. Dorian Varela stood at the center of it all, his arm draped possessively around a woman who wore his last name, like a stolen crown. She laughed at something a diplomat whispered, her fingers trailing along Dorian's lapel with practiced intimacy. The orchestra swelled. Champagne flowed. Paris society smiled and nodded, accepting the beautiful lie he'd constructed. Then the music stopped, not gradually, not politely. It died mid-note as every head turned toward the entrance, where a figure stood silhouetted against the corridor's golden glow. The woman descended the stairs with the unhurried grace of someone who had nothing left to lose and everything to reclaim. Her gown moved like liquid shadow, architectural and unforgiving. No jewelry, no smile, just the absolute certainty of someone who had crawled through hell and emerged holding the deed. Dorian's face drained of color. The woman beside him, the imposter, the mistress, the replacement, froze with her champagne glass halfway to her lips, because walking toward them, through a sea of Paris's elite, was the ghost they thought they'd buried, the wife they'd erased, the woman they'd humiliated into silence. Callista Moreau had returned, and she hadn't come to beg. The morning Callista Moreau's life shattered, she was reviewing blueprints for what would become the most celebrated cultural center in modern Parisian architecture. The Moreau Varela atelier occupied the top 3 floors of a Haussmann building in the 7th arrondissement, where 19th-century elegance met cutting-edge design. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the Eiffel Tower like a postcard she'd stopped noticing years ago. She'd built this. Not just the firm. Though her designs had won the competitions, secured the commissions, shaped the skyline, but the entire ecosystem of their lives. The reputation, the connections, the careful cultivation of Dorian Varela from a charming architectural school graduate into the face of their success. Her phone buzzed, a message from Dorian, running late. Meeting with the Rousseau Foundation pushed. Don't wait up tonight. Callista typed back a quick acknowledgement and returned to her work. This was normal. This was their rhythm. She created, he performed. She designed the impossible. He sold it to the world. A partnership that had lasted 12 years, 7 months, and, she would later calculate with painful precision, 14 days. Madame Moreau? Her assistant, Julian, appeared in the doorway. The Belgium ambassador's office called. They want to move the presentation to next week, which gives us 3 additional days. Callista made a note. Tell them yes, but we'll need their site access extended. Julian hesitated. There's something else. A courier delivered this. He placed a manila envelope on her desk. They insisted it was urgent and personal. The envelope bore no return address. Inside, a single USB drive and a handwritten note on expensive stationery. You deserve to know the truth. A friend. Callista turned the drive over in her palm. Paris thrived on intrigue and anonymous warnings, usually petty grievances dressed up as concern. She nearly threw it away. Nearly. Instead, she inserted it into her laptop. The first video file was dated 8 months ago. A restaurant she recognized, L'Ambroisie, where Dorian had taken a client dinner. The camera angle suggested someone filming from across the room, but the image was clear enough. Dorian sat at a corner table with a woman Callista had never seen. Younger, animated. Her hand covering his across the white tablecloth. Callista's fingers moved mechanically, opening the next file, then the next. A chronology of betrayal, documented with methodical cruelty. Dorian and this woman at a gallery opening where he'd told Callista he had a migraine, walking together along the Seine, entering a building in the Marais, kissing in the doorway. The final video was dated 3 weeks ago. The woman wore a ring. Dorian was looking at her the way he used to look at Callista, Before success, before exhaustion, before their relationship calcified into professional courtesy. Callista watched her hands shake and felt curiously detached from them, as if observing someone else's body, betraying someone else's shock. The office around her, every carefully selected piece, every award on the wall, every blueprint representing hours she'd poured into building their empire, suddenly felt like a museum dedicated to her own stupidity. She played the last video again, studied the woman's face, tried to find something hideous, something obviously inferior, something to explain why, but the woman was just a woman, pretty, young, unencumbered by 12 years of partnership, compromise, and the slow erosion of romance into routine. The door opened. Dorian walked in carrying coffee from their usual cafe, his smile automatic and meaningless. "Hey, sorry I'm late. The Rousseau meeting was—" He saw her face. "What's wrong?" Callista didn't answer immediately. She watched him set down the coffee, watched him cross to her desk, watched him become the man she'd thought she knew, attempting to perform concern. "Who is she?" Callista's voice came out steady, clinical, architect solving a problem steady. Something flickered across his expression. "Who's who?" She turned her laptop toward him. The frozen image showed him and the woman sharing a dessert, their heads close together, laughing. Dorian's performance crumbled. He didn't deny it, didn't scramble for explanations. Instead, something like relief washed over his face, and that, more than the videos, more than the evidence, told Callista everything. "How long have you wanted me to find out?" she asked. He sat down across from her. "Callista?" "How long, Dorian?" 4 months. He rubbed his face. "I've been trying to figure out how to tell you." 4 months. 120 days of coming home to her, kissing her cheek, discussing their projects while planning his exit, while maintaining the fiction. "What's her name?" "Does that matter?" "Yes." Simone Duchamp. She works at the Musée d'Orsay. We met at the Delacroix retrospective. He said it like a confession, but also like a story he'd been wanting to tell. She's... God, Callista, she's interested in me. Not what I can provide or what connections I bring, just me. Callista felt something crack inside her chest. Not her heart. That would come later. This was her dignity splintering. "I see." "Do you?" Dorian leaned forward. "When was the last time you and I talked about anything besides work? When did we last have dinner together without discussing renderings or contracts? We built this together. You built this. I'm just the face you put on it." His voice carried an edge she'd never heard before. "I'm tired of being your billboard, Callista. I'm tired of everyone knowing you're the genius and I'm just the charming translator." "Then leave." The words came out before she'd fully processed them. "If you're so unhappy, leave." "I am." He stood up. "I've been waiting for the right time, but there's never going to be a right time. I'm moving out. Tonight." The room tilted. "Tonight?" "My lawyer will contact your lawyer about the firm. I'm entitled to half the partnership." And there it was. The real reason he'd been waiting, planning, documenting. Not love, leverage. He'd been building his case while she'd been building their empire. "You calculated this." Callista stood, matching his height though feeling infinitely smaller. "The timing, the evidence you must have gathered. How long have you been planning the exit strategy?" "Don't make me the villain. You're married to your work, Callista. I'm just accepting reality." "Married to my work?" She heard her voice rise and hated herself for it. "I built this firm for us. Every competition I won, every impossible deadline I met, that was for our future." "No." Dorian grabbed his jacket from the back of the chair. "It was for your future. I was just along for the ride." He paused at the door. "I'll have movers come tomorrow for my things. Please don't be there. Let's keep this civil." He left. Just walked out of 12 years, like closing a door on a hotel room. Callista stood in the empty office as the Paris afternoon faded into evening. The city lights began their nightly performance, the Eiffel Tower starting its hourly sparkle. Below, people hurried home to partners who loved them, who saw them, who hadn't been planning betrayals measured in months and lawyers. She looked at her laptop, still frozen on the image of Dorian and Simone. Then at the blueprint spread across her desk, a cultural center that would bear the Moreau-Varela name for generations. Their legacy built on the foundation of his lies. Her phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. "There's more you need to know. Check your firm's accounts." "He's been planning this longer than you think." A friend Callista pulled up their business accounts with shaking hands. The pattern emerged slowly, then all at once. Small transfers, retainer payments to a law firm specializing in business dissolution, consulting fees to an accounting company that evaluated partnership assets. He'd been preparing for months. While she worked on the Belgium project, on the Dubai commission, on every design that required her complete focus, Dorian had been systematically constructing his exit. The sun set completely. The office grew dark around her. And Callista Moreau, celebrated architect, genius designer, woman who had spent 12 years building dreams in glass and steel, realized she'd forgotten to design the most important structure of all, a life that couldn't be stolen in a single afternoon. Her phone rang. Her mother, Callista, sent it to voicemail, then her sister, then her best friend from university. Word was spreading through their social circle with the efficient cruelty of Parisian gossip. She was the wife who didn't notice, the successful woman too absorbed in her work to see her husband slipping away, the cautionary tale women would whisper about at dinner parties. Callista looked at her reflection in the darkened window. She barely recognized the woman staring back, impeccably dressed, perfectly composed, completely hollowed out. She picked up her phone and typed a message to her lawyer. "Need to see you first thing tomorrow. It's urgent." Then she walked out of the office she'd built, rode the elevator down through the building she'd helped landmark, and stepped onto the Paris streets she'd helped reshape. Everything around her bore her mark, her vision, her fingerprints. Everything except the man who'd stood beside her through it all. The betrayal would teach her many things in the months to come. But the first lesson landed that night, walking home through the city she'd helped build. Success means nothing when you're eating dinner alone, celebrating victories by yourself, sleeping in a bed that's become a monument to achievement and abandonment. She'd designed buildings that would outlast her lifetime. She just hadn't noticed she was living in one. The dissolution of a 12-year partnership should be private, dignified, handled through lawyers in conference rooms far from public scrutiny. Dorian Varela had other plans. Callista learned this 3 weeks after their separation, when she opened Le Figaro over her morning coffee, a ritual she'd maintained with religious precision, despite the fact that everything else in her life had collapsed into chaos. The coffee tasted like ash lately, but she drank it anyway. Routine was armor. The headline appeared on page 6 of the lifestyle section. Architecture's golden couple splits. Dorian Varela opens up about life after love. The photograph showed Dorian at a cafe terrace, sunlight catching his profile in that effortlessly photogenic way that had made him the face of their firm. Next to him, close enough to suggest intimacy without being overtly provocative, sat Simone Duchamp. The caption read, "Varela with companion Simone Duchamp, curator at the Musée d'Orsay." Companion? Not mistress. Not the woman who had exploded his marriage. Just companion. Callista's hands trembled as she read, "The end of a marriage is never easy," Varela says, stirring his espresso with the contemplative manner of a man who has spent considerable time in reflection. "Callista and I built something extraordinary together," The firm will always be our shared legacy, but somewhere along the way, we forgot to build a life. Indeed, when asked about the challenges of partnership, both professional and personal, Varela becomes thoughtful. Callista is brilliant, genuinely brilliant, but brilliance can be consuming. She poured everything into her designs, into perfection, into achievement. There wasn't much left over for us. The article continues with Varela's thoughts on moving forward, on the impossible position of being overshadowed by a spouse's genius, on the relief of stepping into his own light. Simone Duchamp, he notes, has helped him remember who I am beyond the firm, beyond the projects, beyond being Callista Moreau's husband. The coffee cup shattered in the sink. Callista stared at the pieces scattered across the porcelain, sharp, irreparable, glittering in the morning light, a perfect metaphor her architect's brain immediately registered and resented. He'd rewritten their entire history, turned her dedication into neglect, transformed his betrayal into liberation, made himself the victim of her success. Her phone exploded with messages, friends sending sympathy, colleagues asking if she wanted to respond, her mother calling to ask if she'd seen it, voice tight with maternal fury. But it was the message from her sister that made Callista finally understand the full scope of Dorian's strategy. He's been planting this narrative for months. Remember Margot's dinner party in March? He told everyone you'd become married to your work. This isn't impulse. This is orchestrated. Callista pulled up her laptop and began searching. Once you knew what to look for, the pattern was obvious. A quote here in a trade publication about balancing professional and personal demands. An interview there about the challenges of partnership. A podcast where he discussed supporting a spouse's ambition while maintaining your own identity. He'd been building his defense long before she'd discovered his crime. The firm's phone rang constantly. Clients wanting to know about the partnership's future, press requesting interviews, and through her assistant Julian, a message from Dorian's lawyer. Mr. Varela would like to settle the partnership dissolution quickly and amicably. He's proposing a 50-50 split of all firm assets, intellectual property, and future commissions derived from shared work. 50% of everything she'd created. 50% of the designs that bore her signature, her vision, her countless sleepless nights solving impossible structural problems while he'd been out networking. Madame Moreau? Julian stood in her office doorway looking miserable. The Belgium ambassador's office called. They're asking if the firm will continue, if the project timeline will be affected. Tell them the project continues as planned. Callista's voice came out mechanical. Tell them I've never missed a deadline, and I don't intend to start now. There's something else. Julian closed the door. I probably shouldn't tell you this, but Dorian has been meeting with some of our junior designers, offering them positions at a new firm he's starting. He can't do that. Actually, the non-compete we have them sign only prevents them from working on similar projects for 6 months. After that, Julian trailed off miserably. Callista understood. Dorian wasn't just leaving. He was planning to hollow out her firm, take her trained staff, and compete directly with her using everything she'd taught him. That evening, she received an invitation to the Duchamp Gallery's new exhibition opening. The gallery belonged to Simone's family, old money, old connections, the kind of Parisian establishment that had taken years for Callista to crack as a relative outsider. The invitation was addressed to Callista Moreau and guest. But the guest line was crossed out. A handwritten note added, "Thought you should know Dorian will be attending. Simone is curating. We thought transparency was better than awkwardness. Monsieur Duchamp transparency." They were inviting her to watch them move through her social circles as a couple, to see Simone occupy the space Callista had carved out over a decade of attending these events, making connections, building the relationships that fed their firm's pipeline. She didn't go. But her absence, she learned later, became part of the narrative too. Poor Callista, people whispered over champagne. Too proud to face reality, too focused on her work to have seen this coming. The real humiliation came 2 weeks later at the Paris Architecture Biennale. Callista had committed to speaking on a panel months earlier, before the separation, before the public dismantling of her marriage. She'd considered cancelling. Her lawyer advised it. Her sister begged her to. But Callista Moreau had never cancelled a commitment in her professional life. She arrived at the Palais de Tokyo to discover Dorian was also speaking on a different panel scheduled in the adjacent hall. His topic, collaborative architecture, when to stand behind your partner and when to stand alone. The irony was so thick it was suffocating. Worse, the organizers had placed their panels back-to-back in the same space, with only a 30-minute break between. Callista's panel on innovation in cultural design would end minutes before Dorian's began. Everyone would see them in the same room. Everyone would watch for signs of collapse, bitterness, weakness. She walked onto the stage with her head high, her presentation flawless. Spoke about the Belgium project, about pushing boundaries, about architecture as a form of optimism made concrete. Her voice never wavered, her hands never shook. She almost made it through. Then during the Q&A, someone asked, "Given recent changes in your personal life, how do you maintain creative focus during emotional turmoil?" The room held its breath. 200 architects, designers, and press waiting to see if she'd crack. Architecture, Callista said carefully, requires absolute presence. When you're calculating stress loads or designing spatial relationships, there's no room for distraction. Personal difficulties are irrelevant to structural integrity. The building doesn't care about your marriage. It cares about whether you did the mathematics correctly. Polite applause. But she saw it in their eyes. They wanted more. They wanted tears or rage or some evidence that she was human underneath the composed exterior. She denied them that satisfaction, but as she left the stage and moved through the crowd toward the exit, she saw him. Dorian stood near the entrance, Simone beside him. They were laughing with a group of Swedish designers Callista had introduced him to 2 years ago. Simone's hand rested lightly on Dorian's arm, familiar, possessive, natural. Simone looked up and saw Callista. Instead of discomfort or guilt, her expression held something worse. Pity. She looked at Callista the way you look at someone who's already lost and just doesn't know it yet. Dorian followed her gaze. For a moment, their eyes met across the crowded hall. He didn't look angry or regretful. He looked relieved, like a man who'd finally put down a heavy burden. Callista made it to the bathroom before the shaking started. She locked herself in a stall and pressed her back against the wall, breathing through waves of humiliation that came not from the betrayal itself, but from how completely she'd been rewritten. She was no longer Callista Moreau, visionary architect. She was Callista Moreau, the wife too obsessed with work to notice her husband's affair. The cautionary tale. The woman who built buildings but couldn't build a marriage. Her phone buzzed. A message from her lawyer. Dorian's team is pushing for settlement conference next week. They're threatening to freeze firm operations if you don't negotiate. We need to talk strategy. Another message, this one from a former colleague. Saw you at the Biennale. You handled that with grace. But between us, word is, Dorian's been telling people he effectively ran the firm's business side while you designed. He's trying to claim credit for every commission. You need to protect yourself. Callista stared at the messages, then at her reflection in the bathroom mirror, still impeccably dressed, still composed, still performing the role of woman who has it together. But her eyes told a different story. They were the eyes of someone realizing that truth didn't matter, narrative mattered. and Dorian had spent months crafting his while she'd been too busy working. She walked out of the bathroom to find Simone standing in the corridor, clearly waiting. "Callista." Simone's voice was gentle, which somehow made it worse. "I wanted to talk to you, to explain—" "Don't." The word came out sharper than intended. "I never meant for anyone to get hurt. What Dorian and I have, it just happened. Nothing just happens." Callista heard the exhaustion in her own voice. "People make choices. You both made yours. Now I'm making mine. Which is to stop letting his narrative define me." She walked away, leaving Simone in the corridor. But as she pushed through the exit into the Paris evening, Callista realized she had no idea what her own narrative was anymore. For 12 years, she'd been half of a partnership, half of a marriage, half of Moreau Varela. Who was Callista Moreau alone? She'd built monuments that would outlast her, designed spaces that would shelter thousands, created beauty that would endure centuries. But she couldn't answer the simplest question. Who was she when no one was watching, when there was no deadline, no commission, no panel to speak on? That night, alone in her apartment, the one she'd designed in the building she'd helped landmark, Callista opened a bottle of wine she'd been saving for a special occasion that would never come. She sat at her drafting table, surrounded by blueprints and awards and evidence of a brilliant career, and let herself feel the full weight of her humiliation. Tomorrow, she would be strong. Tomorrow, she would fight Dorian's lawyers and defend her legacy and begin rebuilding. But tonight, she was just a woman who'd lost her husband to a younger mistress, who'd become a cautionary tale, who'd learned that success means nothing if you're eating it alone at a table built for two. The wine tasted like failure, and somewhere across Paris, in the apartment Callista had never seen, Dorian and Simone were probably toasting their future, laughing about the wife who'd never seen it coming. The humiliation wasn't the affair, it was the realization that she'd been so easy to replace, so easy to rewrite, so easy to forget. Callista had designed buildings that would last centuries. She just hadn't noticed she was becoming a ghost in her own life. The settlement meeting was scheduled for a Wednesday in May, in a conference room that overlooked the Seine. Callista arrived 15 minutes early, a lifetime habit of preparation that now felt like weakness. Her lawyer, Marguerite Beaufort, was already there, spreading documents across the table with the efficient brutality of someone who'd navigated hundreds of these dissolutions. "Remember what we discussed," Marguerite said without preamble. "Don't react. Don't engage emotionally. This is business, not marriage counseling. I understand. Do you? Because Dorian's team is going to push every button they can find. They want you angry. Angry people make mistakes." Callista studied the documents, financial projections, asset valuations, a decade of her work reduced to spreadsheet cells and legal terminology. "I won't give them the satisfaction." Dorian arrived exactly on time with 2 lawyers and an accountant. He'd cut his hair, lost weight. He looked, Callista noted with detached bitterness, happy, free, like a man who'd been holding his breath for years and finally remembered how to exhale. He didn't make eye contact. "Shall we begin?" Dorian's lead attorney, a sharp woman named Claudine Mercier, with a reputation for extracting maximum settlements, smiled the way sharks smile at wounded fish. "We believe we can reach an agreement quickly if everyone remains reasonable." "Define reasonable," Marguerite said dryly. Claudine slid a document across the table. "Mr. Varela is entitled to 50% of all firm assets, including intellectual property rights to any designs created during the partnership. Additionally, he's requesting ongoing royalties from any projects completed during his tenure that continue to generate licensing or publication fees." Callista read the numbers. They wanted half of everything, plus a permanent percentage of her future earnings. as if his presence at client dinners was equivalent to her 300-hour work weeks designing the impossible. No. The word came out flat. Absolute. I'm sorry? Claudine's smile sharpened. No to the intellectual property transfer. No to the ongoing royalties. Those designs are mine. He contributed networking and client relations. I'm willing to compensate him fairly for that contribution, but he doesn't get credit for my work. Our position, Claudine continued as if Callista hadn't spoken, is that Mr. Varella's business development and client relationship management were essential to the firm's success. Without his efforts, your designs would never have been built. Surely you can acknowledge that partnership involves more than technical skill. There it was, the knife between the ribs, twisted with legal precision. Your designs would never have been built. My designs, Callista said carefully, won international competitions before they met a single client. My designs solved structural problems that other architects said were impossible. My designs earned awards, publications, and accolades. What specifically did your client contribute beyond looking good in photographs? Dorian finally looked at her. Is that really what you think? That I was just a pretty face? I think you were the person I trusted while I was building our future. I think you used that trust to plan your exit strategy while I was working 100-hour weeks. You worked 100-hour weeks because that's who you are, Callista. Not because I demanded it, not because we needed it. Dorian leaned forward. You disappeared into your work because it was easier than being present in our marriage. Don't! Marguerite's voice cut across the tension. This isn't therapy. This is asset division. Monsieur Varela, if you want to negotiate moral high ground, you'll need to find a different venue. But Claudine was already pulling out another document. Perhaps we should discuss the emotional distress Mr. Varela experienced during the final years of the marriage. The toll of being consistently overlooked, undervalued, and treated as subordinate to his spouse's career. We believe this constitutes grounds for additional compensation. Callista felt something crack. Not break, not yet. But crack. Emotional distress. He was having an affair. An affair that resulted from years of emotional neglect. Claudine's voice was perfectly modulated sympathy. Mr. Varela tried repeatedly to address the imbalance in your relationship. You were too focused on your work to notice his pain. That's a lie. Is it? When was the last time you and Mr. Varela took a vacation? We were building a firm. When was the last time you had dinner together without discussing work? We had a partnership to maintain. When was the last time you prioritized his needs above a deadline? Silence. Claudine smiled. The narrative is quite clear, Madame Moreau. You were an absent spouse who sacrificed marriage for ambition. My client sought comfort elsewhere only after years of being ignored. Any court will be sympathetic to his position. Sympathetic enough to give him half of everything I built? You didn't build it alone. Actually, Marguerite interjected smoothly, she did. I have documentation of every major design, every competition entry, every innovative solution. They all bear Madame Moreau's signature. Mr. Varela's name appears on business contracts and client communications. Important work, certainly, but not the creative force that built this firm's reputation. Claudine pulled out her own stack of documents. And I have testimonials from every major client stating that Dorian Varela was essential to project success, that his vision and guidance shaped the final designs, that he was, in effect, co-creator. Callista stared at the testimonials, recognized the signatures. These were clients she'd worked with directly, clients she'd presented to. Clients whose impossible demands she'd solved through structural innovation while Dorian had been, what? Charming them? Taking them to dinner? He's been collecting these for months, she said quietly. He's been protecting his interests, Claudine corrected. While you were focused on your next award, he was ensuring he'd be fairly compensated for his contributions. Compensated for what? Showing up? Smiling? I designed those buildings. I solved the engineering problems. I spent nights on site when contractors couldn't figure out my specifications. Where was he? At gallery openings with his mistress? Dorian stood abruptly. I won't sit here and be attacked. Then leave. Callista stood too. That's what you do, isn't it? Leave when things get difficult? Leave when someone asks you to account for yourself? I stayed for 12 years in a marriage where I was invisible. You were invisible because you contributed nothing. I built everything while you played dress-up in nice suits and pretended my work was ours. Your work? Dorian's mask finally cracked. Your work would still be sitting in a portfolio if I hadn't convinced clients to take risks on your wild ideas. You're brilliant, Callista, but you have zero understanding of how to talk to human beings. I translated your genius into something people could understand. I made you accessible. You made yourself necessary. Because I was necessary. You needed me whether you want to admit it or not. I needed a partner. What I got was a parasite. The room went silent. Claudine gathered her documents with deliberate precision. I think we're done here. Madame Mercier, please inform your client that we'll be filing for full dissolution in court. We will be requesting 50% of all assets, ongoing royalties, and compensation for emotional distress. We will also be submitting evidence that Madame Moreau created a hostile work environment that justified Mr. Varela seeking external emotional support. Hostile work environment? Callista heard her voice rising and couldn't stop it. I gave him everything. The firm, the reputation, my trust, and he's calling it hostile? You gave him your leftovers, Dorian said quietly. Whatever energy you had left after you'd poured everything into your buildings. Do you know what it's like to come second to concrete and steel? Do you know what it's like to find out the person you built your life around was methodically planning your destruction? I wasn't destroying you. I was saving myself. They stared at each other across the conference table. 12 years of marriage, partnership, and shared dreams now reduced to legal strategy and barely controlled rage. Marguerite stood. We're leaving. Claudine, you'll have our counter-proposal by end of week. It will not include ongoing royalties, intellectual property transfer, or a cent for emotional distress. If your client wants a war, we're prepared to give him one. Callista walked out of the conference room, down the elevator onto the Paris streets. The spring sunshine felt obscene, bright and cheerful, while her life disintegrated. Marguerite followed her onto the sidewalk. That went as badly as possible, her lawyer said bluntly. I lost control. Yes, and they recorded every word. Expect that parasite comment to appear in court documents. Callista closed her eyes. I gave him everything. No, you gave him access to everything. There's a difference. Marguerite lit a cigarette, offered one to Callista. You need to decide something now. Do you want to fight this the legal way, slow, expensive, messy, or do you want to hurt him? What's the difference? Legal means we defend your intellectual property in court. Painful means we destroy his reputation so thoroughly that even if he wins half your firm, it won't matter, because no one will work with him. Marguerite exhaled smoke. I'm good at legal, but if you want painful, you need someone else. Who? Marguerite smiled. Ever heard of Zafira Laurent? The name was familiar. A public relations specialist who'd handled several high-profile divorces in Paris. Her reputation was surgical. She didn't just protect her clients, she obliterated their opponents. She's expensive, Marguerite continued, and she only takes cases she believes in. But if she agrees to help you, Dorian will regret every decision that brought him here. Callista thought about the settlement demand, about Dorian's testimonials, about sitting in court while lawyers argued over who deserved credit for her work, about watching him walk away with half of everything while Simone Duchamp stood beside him, young and smiling and blameless. "Set up a meeting," she said. That night, Callista returned to her apartment and did something she hadn't allowed herself to do since the separation. She cried, not the delicate tears of someone maintaining composure. Ugly, body-shaking sobs that came from somewhere deep and untouched, from the part of her that had genuinely believed in partnership and love and shared futures. She cried for the 12 years she'd invested, for the version of herself that had been naive enough to think success was enough. For every late night she'd worked while Dorian was out networking with his mistress. For the children they'd discussed, but never had because the timing was never right. For the home they'd designed together, her drawings, his suggestions, that would now be sold and split and occupied by strangers. But mostly, she cried because she'd been so easy to replace. When the tears finally stopped, something else emerged. Something cold and focused and utterly without mercy. Callista walked to her drafting table and pulled out a blank sheet. She began sketching, not a building, not a design, but a plan. She'd spent her career solving impossible structural problems. Now she would solve this one. Dorian wanted half her firm? Fine. But he'd discover that half of nothing was still nothing. He wanted public sympathy. She'd show the world exactly who he was. He wanted his new life with Simone. She'd make sure that life was built on scorched earth. Callista Moreau had spent 12 years building. Now she would learn to destroy. And when she was finished, Dorian Varela would understand the difference between being a partner and being an architect. Architects don't just create. They know exactly where to place the charges to bring the whole structure down. Zafira Laurent's office occupied a discreet townhouse in Saint-Germain-des-Prés, the kind of address that suggested old money and newer secrets. The interior was all minimalist elegance, like a gallery where the only exhibit was other people's demolished reputations. "Tell me why you're here," Zafira said without preamble. She was mid-50s, impeccably styled, with eyes that had witnessed too many marital implosions to be shocked by anything. Callista laid out the entire story, the affair, the settlement demands, Dorian's narrative construction, the testimonials, the humiliation at the Biennale. She spoke clinically, architect presenting a problem precisely. When she finished, Zafira was quiet for a long moment. "Do you want him back?" "God, no." "Do you want revenge?" Callista considered this carefully. "I want the truth. I want people to know who built that firm. I want my work recognized as mine. And yes, I want him to understand what he's actually done." "Not revenge, then. Justice." Zafira smiled slightly. "Better. Revenge makes you look petty. Justice makes you look righteous." She opened her laptop. "First question. How much of your firm's success can you definitively prove was your work alone?" "All the design work, every competition entry, every innovative solution." "Can you document that?" "Every drawing has my signature. Every technical specification was written by me. Every late-night problem-solving session has my fingerprints on it, literally. I work in physical models before I go digital." "Good. Second question. How much of Dorian's client relationship work was actually his?" Callista paused. "What do you mean?" "Networking requires groundwork. Someone introduces you to someone who introduces you to a potential client. Who did that groundwork? Who opened doors? Who built the initial relationships that allowed Dorian to walk through and be charming?" The answer emerged slowly, then all at once. "I did. Every major client came through connections I'd developed. my university network, my competition wins, my publications. So Dorian's contribution was maintaining relationships you'd established? Yes. That's not partnership, that's employment. Zafira made notes. Third question, the affair with Simone Duchamp. When did it actually begin? The videos showed 8 months ago. But when did it begin? Zafira leaned forward. Affairs don't start at the first documented date. They start with attraction, flirtation, testing boundaries. I guarantee your husband was cultivating Simone Duchamp long before 8 months ago. How does that help me? Because if I can prove the affair predates his claimed timeline of emotional neglect as justification, his entire narrative collapses. He wasn't driven to infidelity by a workaholic wife. He was cheating on a devoted partner who was building their future. Zafira pulled up a document. I need access to all his communications, emails, texts, calendar, anything that shows the timeline. I don't have access anymore. But your firm's IT system does. And you still control the firm. Zafira smiled. Get me access, I'll find the truth. Over the next 3 weeks, Callista executed the most important design of her career, the systematic reconstruction of reality. The firm's IT records revealed patterns Dorian had thought were hidden, calendar entries deleted but still logged in backups. Email threads that showed the affair had begun 14 months ago, 6 months before he claimed to be suffering from Callista's neglect. Text messages with Simone that revealed they'd been planning their future together while Callista was finalizing the Belgium project. But Zafira found something more valuable, evidence that Dorian had been using firm funds for his affair, expensive dinners charged as client meetings, hotel rooms booked as business travel, gifts purchased through the firm's accounts. None of it was technically illegal. He was a partner after all. But it painted a picture of a man using his wife's success to finance his betrayal. This is good, Zafira said during their weekly strategy session. But it's not enough. We need to shift the public narrative. Right now, you're the workaholic wife. We need to make you the betrayed genius. How? By reminding everyone exactly who you are. Zafira slid a folder across her desk. These are interview requests you've declined over the past year. Architecture magazines, design publications, TED Talk invitations. You said no to all of them because you were too busy working. I was designing the Belgium project. And Dorian was out being the public face of your firm. That ends now. You're going to accept every invitation. You're going to speak at every conference. You're going to remind the architectural world that Callista Moreau is not the supporting character in this story. She's the entire story. Callista looked at the list. Dozens of opportunities she'd dismissed because she preferred to work rather than talk about work. This will take time away from actual design. You're already spending all your time fighting lawyers. Spend it building your public presence instead. Zafira pulled up a website. And we're going to start here. It was the Palais Garnier website, advertising their annual charity gala. The event drew Paris's cultural elite, politicians, artists, business leaders, and society fixtures. The kind of event Callista had attended dutifully beside Dorian, but never particularly enjoyed. Why this? Because, Zafira said with a predatory smile, Dorian and Simone will be there. The Duchamp are major donors. They'll be presenting as a couple. Society will be watching to see if you hide or crumble. She leaned forward. Instead, you're going to walk in like you own the building, because architecturally speaking, you helped save it during the restoration committee work 3 years ago. That was advisory. But your structural solutions prevented the main hall from collapsing. I checked. You were never publicly credited. Zafira pulled up architectural journals. The restoration committee credited consulting engineers, but I have your original reports, your calculations, your innovations. We're going to make sure everyone at that gala knows the building they're partying in is standing because of you." Over the following weeks, Callista began her reconstruction. She accepted an interview with Architectural Digest, where she carefully, methodically laid out her design philosophy and her role in every major project. She gave a lecture at her alma mater, where she presented technical drawings that bore only her signature. She wrote an opinion piece for Le Monde about women in architecture and the tendency to credit male partners for female achievement. She never mentioned Dorian by name. She didn't have to. The implication was clear to anyone paying attention. The architectural community began to notice. Comments appeared on articles, Twitter threads from young designers pointing out that every award-winning design from Moreau Varela had Callista's signature on the original drawings. A feminist architecture blog published a timeline showing that the firm's competition wins corresponded exactly to periods when Callista was lead designer. Dorian's lawyers sent a cease and desist letter, claiming Callista was damaging his reputation. Marguerite responded with documentation proving every claim was factual. Truth, it turned out, was an absolute defense. But the real shift came 3 days before the Palais Garnier Gala, when Zafira called with news. "I found something. Simone Duchamp wasn't just some innocent art curator who happened to fall for your husband. She's been systematically targeting successful partnerships in Paris's cultural elite for the past 5 years. What? Before Dorian, she had an affair with a married gallery owner. Before him, a married conductor. Both men left their wives, both lost significant portions of their businesses in the divorce, and both ended up hiring Simone into professional roles afterward." Zafira's voice carried sharp satisfaction. "She's a professional homewrecker with a pattern, and I can prove it." Why would she do this? Ambition. These men all had something she wanted. Connections, prestige, access. Your husband had an architectural firm. She's already positioning herself as his business development consultant. Callista absorbed this. She's going to hollow out his reputation the same way he hollowed out mine. Eventually, but right now she's useful to him. Which means we can use their relationship against them both. Zafira pulled up photographs. "The gala is in 3 days. You need something that makes a statement. Something that says, 'I am not the defeated ex-wife. I am the architect of my own resurrection.'" "What did you have in mind?" "The dress doesn't matter. It's the entrance that counts." Zafira smiled. "You're going to walk in alone. Head high, no date, no support system, no shield. Just you, owning your space. And when Dorian and Simone see you, they need to understand that you're not broken. You're rebuilt, stronger than before. And then you smile. You network. You remind everyone in that room why Callista Moreau is a name that matters. You let them see what Dorian lost." Zafira leaned back. "Revenge isn't about destruction, Callista. It's about making someone realize they destroyed the best thing in their life." The night before the gala, Callista stood in her apartment and looked at the dress hanging in her closet. She'd chosen something architectural in its construction. Clean lines, geometric precision, the kind of elegance that required no ornamentation because the structure itself was statement enough. Her phone buzzed. A message from her sister. "You don't have to do this. You've already proven yourself." But she did have to do this. Not for Dorian. Not even for herself, really. For every woman who'd been told her success was actually someone else's achievement. For every designer whose work had been credited to a more charismatic partner. For every wife who'd looked away from her marriage long enough to build something brilliant, only to discover her husband had used that time to build an exit strategy. She texted back, "I know, but I'm doing it anyway." Another message, this one from Zafira. "Remember, You're not there to make a scene. You're there to remind them who you are. The building they're celebrating in, you helped save it. The gala they're attending. You have more right to be there than anyone. Walk in like you own the place, because intellectually you helped build it. Callista looked at her reflection. 38 years old, brilliant architect, betrayed wife, woman learning day by day that strength isn't the absence of breaking, it's the choice to rebuild anyway. Tomorrow night, she would walk into the Palais Garnier. She would face the society that had turned her into a cautionary tale. She would stand in front of the man who'd betrayed her and the woman who'd helped him do it. And she would show them all what resurrection looked like. Hey, if you're rooting for her like I am, show it by liking this video. And if you want to see more mini-series like this, subscribe to the channel, because there's a lot more coming your way. The dress hung in the light like an architectural drawing brought to life, precise, intentional, unforgiving. Callista Moreau was ready to make her entrance, not as someone's wife, not as someone's ex, not as a cautionary tale, as herself. Finally, devastatingly, entirely herself. The night of the Palais Garnier Gala arrived with the kind of Paris evening that made tourists weep. Golden light filtering through clouds, the city glowing like a promise. Callista stood at her apartment window and watched the sun set over the buildings she'd helped shape. Her dress was already on, her hair was done. She was as ready as she'd ever be. Her phone buzzed. Zafira, car is downstairs, remember? You're not walking in to prove anything. You're walking in because you belong there. There's a difference. Callista picked up her clutch and walked out of her apartment without looking back. The car ride to the Palais Garnier took 20 minutes through evening traffic. She spent the time breathing, not nervous breaths. She'd given presentations to hostile committees, pitched impossible designs to skeptical boards, defended her work against critics who thought women couldn't understand structural engineering. This was just another performance. Except it wasn't. This was personal in a way blueprints never were. The car pulled up to the Palais Garnier's grand entrance. Photographers lined the red carpet, not as many as the Cannes Film Festival, but enough to make arrivals feel performative. Callista had walked this carpet beside Dorian at previous galas, always slightly behind, letting him handle the cameras while she thought about structural loads and cantilever equations. Tonight, she stepped out alone. The photographers noticed immediately. Cameras swiveled, flashes erupted. She heard whispered questions. Is that Callista Moreau? I thought she wouldn't come. Where's Varela? She walked up the steps with the measured pace of someone who had nowhere to rush to and nothing to prove. Let them look, let them photograph, let them wonder why she wasn't hiding. Inside, the Palais Garnier's foyer glittered with Belle Epoque opulence, marble, gold leaf, and that particularly French grandeur that managed to feel excessive and perfect simultaneously. 500 guests milled through the space in evening wear, champagne glasses catching light like promises. Callista accepted a glass from a passing waiter and surveyed the room. She spotted familiar faces, architects she'd competed against, clients she'd worked with, society fixtures who'd whispered about her marriage's collapse. They noticed her. Some looked away. Others watched openly, waiting for drama. She disappointed them by simply existing, poised and present. Callista Moreau. A voice behind her. She turned to find Philippe Marchand, director of the Palais Garnier's Restoration Committee. I wasn't sure you'd come. Why wouldn't I? I helped restore this building. Philippe's expression shifted, surprised, then embarrassed. Of course, your structural analysis during the restoration was invaluable. I should have mentioned that in my opening remarks, but you credited the engineering firm instead of the consultant who actually solved the problem. She said it without rancor, just fact. It's fine, Philippe. I'm used to my work being attributed to others. He had the grace to look uncomfortable. I could still mention, "Don't worry about it. I know what I contributed. That's enough." She smiled slightly. "Though I notice you're using the original lighting design I suggested. It looks beautiful." "It does." Felipe studied her. "You seem different." "Do I?" "Stronger. More present. Like you've finally taken up all the space you're entitled to." Callista considered this. "Maybe I have." She moved through the crowd, and something strange happened. People approached her, not with pity or awkward sympathy, but with genuine interest. An Italian architect asked about her Belgium project. A journalist requested an interview about women in structural design. A young designer asked how she'd calculated the load distribution on the cultural centre's cantilevered roof. She answered questions, discussed projects, explained innovations, and slowly the narrative began to shift. She wasn't the abandoned wife at a gala. She was Callista Moreau, architect, holding court in a building she'd helped save. Then the orchestra stopped. Callista turned toward the grand staircase and felt time crystallize. Because descending the stairs, arm in arm, were Dorian and Simone. Simone wore something dramatic and attention-seeking, the kind of dress that announced its wearer rather than complimenting her. Dorian looked exactly as he always did, polished, charming, comfortable in the spotlight. They reached the bottom of the stairs, and the crowd parted slightly. Not obviously, but enough. The social calculation was immediate and brutal. Dorian had left Callista for this younger woman. Simone had successfully stolen a husband. They were together now, public and unapologetic. Dorian's eyes found Callista across the room. For a moment, they just looked at each other. 12 years of marriage, partnership, and shared dreams, now reduced to this. Former spouses at a society gala, separated by 100 feet and an unbridgeable gulf of betrayal. Callista raised her champagne glass slightly. A salute, an acknowledgement, a message that said, "I see you, I survived you, I'm still here." Dorian's expression flickered, confusion perhaps, or the beginning of understanding. He'd expected her to hide, to crumble, to disappear into her work, and let him occupy their shared social space unchallenged. Instead, she'd shown up and reminded everyone why her name carried weight. Simone followed Dorian's gaze and stiffened when she saw Callista. But before either of them could react, Philippe Marchand stepped to the microphone to begin the evening's program. "Welcome to the Palais Garnier's annual gala," he announced. "Before we begin tonight's performance, I want to acknowledge some of the people who make this historic building possible." He ran through the usual list: donors, board members, supporters. Then he paused. "I also want to correct an oversight from our restoration 3 years ago. We credited our engineering firm for the structural solutions that prevented collapse in the main hall. But the truth is, those solutions came from one person, Callista Moreau, whose innovative stress load calculations and support design saved this building. Callista, please stand so we can acknowledge your contribution." The room went silent. Callista hadn't expected this. Felipe must have decided to make amends. She stood slowly, feeling 500 pairs of eyes turned toward her. The applause started small, then built. Architects who knew the technical difficulty of what she'd solved. Engineers who understood the innovation required. Even society figures who simply recognized that she'd been publicly validated in a room that had been whispering about her marriage's failure. Across the room, Dorian's face had gone pale. Because everyone now understood, Callista Moreau wasn't just a brilliant architect. She'd literally saved the building they were celebrating in. Her work was beneath their feet, above their heads, holding up the very space where Dorian was trying to debut his new relationship. Felipe continued, "I encourage everyone to seek Callista out this evening if you're interested in learning about the restoration process. Her work is a masterclass in problem-solving." The applause continued as Callista sat down. Around her, people leaned in with questions, requests for her card, invitations to speak at upcoming events. She'd been invisible for 12 years, standing beside Dorian while he worked the room. Tonight, she'd become the room. The evening continued. Callista networked with genuine engagement rather than dutiful attendance, discussed projects, made connections, reminded the architectural world that she existed independent of her failed marriage. And then, inevitably, Dorian approached. He waited until she was momentarily alone, near the bar between conversations. "Callista." "Dorian." "You look well." "I am well." He shifted uncomfortably. "I didn't expect you to come tonight. Why wouldn't I? I have every right to be here, more right than most, as it turns out." Philippe's speech, that was unnecessary. Was it? Or was it accurate? She turned to face him fully. "You spent 12 years taking credit for my work. Tonight, someone finally corrected the record. If that makes you uncomfortable, perhaps you should examine why. I never took credit for your designs. You just stood beside me while everyone assumed we were equal contributors. You never corrected that assumption." She paused. "Actually, that's not true. According to your settlement demands, you actively encouraged it. I'm entitled to fair compensation. For what, Dorian? For being charming at dinner parties, for maintaining relationships I established, for using firm funds to finance your affair?" His jaw tightened. "That's a lie." "Is it? Should we discuss the hotel receipts, the restaurant charges, the gifts purchased on the firm's accounts?" She kept her voice even, clinical. "I have documentation, Dorian. Every expense you thought was hidden, every meeting that was actually a date, every business trip that was actually a romantic getaway. You had me investigated. I had our firm's finances audited, standard procedure during dissolution. The investigation was just a natural consequence of what we found." Dorian looked around, suddenly aware that people might be watching. This isn't the place. Actually, this is exactly the place. You wanted public validation of your new relationship. You wanted to parade Simone through our social circles and have everyone accept her. So accept this too. I'm not disappearing. I'm not hiding. I'm not letting you rewrite history. Simone materialized beside Dorian, her hand finding his arm with possessive ease. "Is everything all right?" "Fine," Dorian said tightly. Simone looked at Callista with poorly disguised hostility. "You're causing a scene." "Am I?" Callista glanced around the room. No one was staring. No one was filming. It was just three people having a conversation. Or am I just existing in a space where you'd prefer I didn't? "This is exactly why Dorian left you," Simone said, her voice sharp. "You're cold, calculating, incapable of basic human warmth." Interesting perspective from someone who makes a career of seducing married men. Callista said it pleasantly, like commenting on the weather. "Tell me, Simone, how many partnerships have you destroyed? 3? 4? I lost count when Zafira showed me your pattern." Simone's face went white. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Of course you don't. Just like you don't know that Dorian is already planning his exit strategy from you too. He's been meeting with a business attorney about separating from the firm he's supposedly building with you. Did he mention that? Or is transparency only required from wives, not mistresses?" Dorian grabbed Simone's arm. "We're leaving." "Already?" Callista smiled. "But the evening's just begun, and I was so enjoying our reunion." They walked away, Simone visibly shaken, Dorian rigid with suppressed rage. Callista watched them go and felt nothing. No satisfaction, no regret. Just the cool certainty of someone who'd finally stopped letting other people's narratives define her story. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of conversations and connections. Callista stayed until the end, one of the last to leave, because she could. because this was her space now, not as Dorian's wife, not as half of a partnership, but as herself. She stepped out into the Paris night and breathed in the city she'd helped shape. Somewhere out there, buildings she'd designed stood against the sky, structures that would outlast her, outlast Dorian, outlast every petty drama and personal failure. She'd built monuments, and in doing so, she'd learned the most important architectural principle of all. The foundation matters more than the facade. Dorian had been all facade, charming, polished, beautiful to look at. But when pressure was applied, he'd crumbled. Callista's foundation had held. Her phone buzzed. "Zafira, you were magnificent. The architectural blogs are already writing about Philippe's acknowledgement. By tomorrow, everyone will remember you saved that building." "How does it feel?" Callista typed back. "Like finally taking credit for my own work." Another message, this one from Marguerite. "Dorian's lawyers called. They want to settle. He's willing to accept 30% instead of 50. We have momentum. 30%. Still more than he deserved, but less than he'd demanded. A crack in his certainty. The beginning of understanding that his narrative was collapsing. Callista looked up at the Palais Garnier behind her, its facade illuminated against the night sky. Inside those walls, her calculations held the building together. Her innovations prevented collapse. Her mind had solved problems other engineers said were impossible. Dorian could have 50% of the firm's finances. Hell, he could have everything they'd built together. Because Callista had finally understood the truth. Buildings were just buildings. Firms were just businesses. But the ability to solve the impossible, the knowledge she carried, the reputation she'd rebuilt, that was hers alone, and no settlement could divide it. She walked to her car, got in, and drove through the Paris night toward her apartment. Tomorrow, she'd return Marguerite's call. Tomorrow, she'd negotiate the final terms of her divorce. Tomorrow, she'd continue the work of rebuilding her life as a single whole person, rather than half of a failed partnership. But tonight, she'd simply exist in the satisfaction of having shown up, stood up, and reminded the world and herself that Callista Moreau was not a cautionary tale. She was the architect of her own liberation, and she'd designed it to last. 6 months later, Callista stood in front of the Belgium Cultural Centre on its opening day. The building rose against the Brussels sky like a crystallized thought. Glass, steel and concrete, assembled in proportions that shouldn't work but did. Visitors streamed through the entrance, photographing the atrium where light bent through her calculated angles. The plaque by the entrance read, "Designed by Callista Moreau, architect." Not Moreau Varela, not a partnership. Just her name, her vision, her impossible solution to an impossible problem. Dorian had taken his settlement, 40% in the end, after Marguerite had systematically demolished every claim his lawyers made. He'd used it to start his own firm with Simone. Callista had seen the announcement in the architectural press. The firm was called Varela Design Studio. The website featured Dorian's photograph and Simone's title, Creative Director. Callista had laughed when she saw it. Creative Director. Simone had successfully positioned herself in the role she'd given Dorian, the person who claimed credit for someone else's creativity. They deserved each other. She'd heard through industry gossip that Dorian's first major commission had fallen through. Clients had questions about his actual design capabilities when he couldn't produce technical drawings or solve engineering challenges. Turned out, being charming wasn't enough when you had to actually deliver a building that wouldn't collapse. Callista felt no satisfaction in his struggles. She'd moved beyond him, not through forgiveness, but through the simple process of building something new. She'd taken on projects solo, worked brutal hours, proved she didn't need a partner to be brilliant. Her firm was smaller now, leaner, but every design bore only her signature, and every morning she woke up in her apartment, the one she'd designed for herself, not for a marriage that was already dying, and felt nothing but relief. Because here's what she'd learned through the fire of betrayal and rebuilding. You cannot build your life on someone else's foundation. You cannot design your dreams to accommodate someone who sees you as a stepping stone. You cannot pour your brilliance into a partnership with someone who was always planning to take credit and leave. She'd built buildings that would last centuries. Now she'd built a life that belonged entirely to her. The liberation wasn't in leaving Dorian. It was in realizing she'd never needed him at all. The opening ceremony began. Callista gave a short speech about the design challenges, the structural innovations, the countless hours of problem-solving. The crowd applauded. The Belgian Minister of Culture shook her hand. Journalists requested interviews, and Callista accepted it all with the calm certainty of someone who knew her worth, had proven it, and would never again let anyone diminish it. That evening, back in Paris, she sat at her drafting table with a new project spread before her. A museum in Tokyo wanted something impossible, a cantilever that defied physics, a space that seemed to float. Callista picked up her pencil and began to design the impossible, because that's what she did, that's what she'd always done. She built dreams out of mathematics and vision. She solved problems other people said couldn't be solved. She created beauty that would outlast her failures, her heartbreaks, her marriages. Dorian had taken her trust and betrayed it. Simone had taken a husband and hollowed him out. Together, they'd tried to take her legacy, but you cannot steal what someone carries inside them. Callista Moreau had rebuilt herself from the rubble of her marriage, and what emerged was stronger, clearer, more authentically herself than the woman who'd existed in partnership with someone unworthy of her. She was free. Not because she'd beaten him, but because she'd stopped letting him matter. And in the end, that was the greatest architecture of all. Building a life so solid, so beautiful, so entirely your own, that betrayal couldn't shake its foundation. She bent over her drafting table and drew the first line of her impossible Tokyo museum. The pencil moved with the certain hand of someone who'd learned the hardest lesson. You cannot build on someone else's promises, but you can build on your own strength. And that structure will stand forever.